Welcome to the ACS podcast family.
We're your hosts, Angie and Charlene.
Where every week you can find new material centered around your life.
Thanks for joining us on our journey. Welcome back to week 3 on self-care. So far we've talked about spiritual self-care and physical self-care, and this week we are talking about emotional self-care. And how can you do that? So maybe some activities that can help you connect with what's going on in your emotions.
Let's start with talking about how our emotions are energy, right? Everything in the universe is all energy. Everything from the computer or the phone that you might be listening to this audio file on, to the chair that you're sitting on, to the car that you're driving, to the water that you're drinking, to the food that you're eating, to the furniture in your home. Everything is just energy. It's all molecules vibrating back and forth. And that is the same, like you think about radio waves, you think about television frequencies, you think about all of that. And even our brain waves can be monitored, right? So we have thoughts in our head and those can be monitored and you can see that there's waves associated with those. So it's all just energy that's vibrating back and forth. So our emotions are also energy, and our energy can change. It can change from moment to moment, and we're maybe thinking about something one way one moment and then think about it in a different way in a different moment. If you go back to last month when we were talking about perceptions, how we can shift the perception on anything that we're looking at or thinking about or what's going on in our experience. Our thoughts are what causes our feelings. We can think about something one way and it causes us to feel a certain way. And if we think about it a different way, it can cause us to feel a different way. And the feelings that we have are what causes us to take actions. If you're feeling happy, you're feeling excited, you're going to take a different action step. You're going to do different things in your life than if you're depressed, if you're frustrated, if you're sad, if you're angry. Those actions are what causes the results that we're getting, which is why emotional self-care really is so important. Because that plays a big part in the results that we're getting, because it comes from our emotional health and how we're feeling.
So when you were saying all of that, it just gave me this whole idea. So have you ever been driving someplace and maybe you go around a certain curve, and every time you go around that certain curve, you have just this overwhelming feeling of sadness? Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe every time you pull into a certain place and every time you get there, you are like pumped. You are like jazzed. It doesn't matter what happened. It was like your favorite song came on the radio and you had your favorite caffeinated drink and you can take on the whole world because right here in this moment, right now, and it happens in a specific spot. I wish that I had notes or something that I could give you exact verbiage from it. But I remember looking this up because I was told that it was leftover energy. And I'm like, leftover energy? Like that just sounds crazy to me. But if you are in a specific spot, and the reason why this all happened is because there's a specific spot that I was driving through, and every time that I drove through it, I was really sad. Like, it didn't matter that, Sir Mix-a-Lot was on the radio, and I had the windows down and the radio up, and I was like singing as soon as I hit this spot. It was like I was driving into a dark cloud. And then it would take me a while to get out of it. And somebody told me about this thing about leftover energy. And then they said, start doing some research on it. And it turns out that there was way back when, it was not a battlefield, but there was a battle during the Civil War times where a lot of people died. And I mean, again, I have goosebumps talking about it right now because the fact that I could feel that was insane. I mean, it was just, because, who goes looking for that? Who goes and I always feel sad standing in this certain spot. I wonder what happens. And I thought, well, everybody must feel it because I think everybody thinks like me. And they don't. But so your energy, it stays. It stays after you're gone. It stays in a room when you leave. You just kind of hold on to space. And I know it sounds so crazy to talk about it. Well, not with you, but maybe to hear it from a listener's point of view. But it's the same thing as learning about how electricity works for the first time. In the early 1900s, nobody thought that anything could turn on a light except for a candle. And then all of a sudden, there's electricity. And how does it work? And energy is the same thing. And I feel like we stopped learning almost about energy, which creates your emotional health. You have to be aware of it.
Well, you have to be aware of the energy in the space that you're in. So you create your own feelings and how you're feeling about certain things. And you're right, there's places that you go and places where you feel really good and places that you might not feel as good. So you think about walking into your favorite coffee shop. Why is it your favorite coffee shop? Or you think about walking into whatever restaurant you're going into, and have you ever sat down and said, wow, I just really like the atmosphere of this place? In restaurants and shopping places, a lot of times we call it atmosphere, but it's the same thing. There's a vibration or an emotional energy, an energy or a frequency to a place. I have a lot of guests that come through my home and stay with me. And one of the things that I hear from them a lot is that my home has really great energy.
Yeah.
And why is that? It is because of the energy that I bring to it, that I've put into it, and it's because of the vibrational frequency that I surround it with, which sounds really interesting or really kind of wacky, I'm sure, to some people, but kind of pushing that out and filling a place with the energy that you're coming from when you're a positive person or a happy person versus walking into a home where there's just sadness. And you know, I had a client once tell me that she felt like she would absorb the sadness in walking into some of her clients' homes. And that's the thing, right? How does your home feel? Does it feel good to walk into your house? Before I moved into this place that I'm in now, I had a home and the energy in that place was not as good. I would sit out in my driveway in my car for sometimes a half an hour or more because I didn't want to go into my house because I didn't like it and I didn't like the way that it felt.
No, and your home is really inviting. I just take my shoes off and walk in. And you know how sometimes you go to somebody else's house and you're like, do I take my shoes off? Do I leave my shoes on? Like, what am I doing? And I'm like, nope, barefoot and in your room. That is exactly it. I mean, we have a lot of children pass through our house. And even when we don't have foster children coming through, our house is always filled with the neighborhood kids, and they are always just being kids and just being there. And I think that changes the energy of my house. Like, my house is conducive to, you can play, you can run. I mean, don't leave the front door open because you let the dog out, but leave the back door open. I might go close it a couple hundred times and say, close the door, but it's never a place of trauma. It's not. And when it is a place of trauma, because trauma happens everywhere, we talk about it and we clear the air. Like, we're not going to just all go to bed and be angry. And I'm not saying that we never go to bed angry, because anybody who tells you that, I think, is lying. Because y'all go to bed and then you just lay there. But we clear the air, and that's really important, to clear the air and having that constant communication and changing that energy in that room. Like you said, you bring it, you feel it. But when somebody comes in and sits at your kitchen table and they are filled with negative energy, or you're driving in the car and they're filled with negative energy, I think I told you, I like to pretend like I'm a visual person. So I have to pretend that there's this big bubble that surrounds me, and all of that negative energy and all of that anger that comes from not passing a test, or from a bad therapy session, or from just anything that triggered the bad energy in them. I'm in this gigantic bubble. So when they're dishing it out, even if it's something as simple as, no, I don't want to eat there, but it comes out with just venom. Their words, I don't know how to explain it, but it just comes out so negative, and it bounces off of my pretty little bubble, which is like this beautiful iridescent thing, in case any of you need a visual. And it literally turns into hearts and rainbows and butterflies and sparkles, and like flies back at them and smacks them in the head with happiness and goodness. Now, I'm sometimes really angry when I get into my own little bubble, and I have to stop my energy from being so negative, because then I'm just going to be bouncing that back at me. That is not a good thing. But I have to stop and make a conscious decision. Like, I'm not going to be a vessel for negativity, and to stop myself and to go, you can be negative right now, but I'm going to help you change what's going on with you so that you can get back to a place of calm and happiness.
Well, that kind of leads us into, what are some things you can do? We're talking about energy, and to really drive that home, that energy that we're talking about is our emotional self. That's the emotional self-care that we're talking about. How do you feel good? How do you feel calm? How do you get to that place of balance and alignment? And that's what we're talking about. And we're talking about it in terms of energy. And other people use different words, but that's a word that resonates with us. So that's why we're talking about it that way. But now it's time to talk about some of those things that you can do to find that balance. And Charlene had a great point with her magical bubble. And how does that work?
Come to my magical bubble.
But you talked about sometimes you're angry when you get in that bubble and you have to stop and reset. So what do you, like, how does that work for you?
For me, it was becoming aware. And my husband was really great of making me aware of my emotions. And I say that, but it didn't start out in a place where I could laugh and be smiley about it, where he was like, you are being mean. And I was like, what? I'm not being mean. And it wasn't that I was intending to be mean with my words, but at that moment I was feeling so hurt that my words had venom and that my actions then, I didn't just come in and put my stuff down. I came in and I slammed my stuff down because I was taking that energy that was in me and trying to get it out of my body, which came out as anger or meanness, as he likes to call it. And now I'm never mean. He says I'm perfect now. I'm just kidding. So he really started making me aware of what I was doing. And now it's almost, it's like training yourself to do something where Pavlov's law, the bell rings and the dogs get food. So now when I can feel myself getting angry, it's almost like a bell rings and I'm like, whoa, check yourself. So it's almost like he lives in my head now.
But that's interesting, right? Because one of the things, a couple weeks ago, I had an encounter. My ex and I were discussing some things, and he doesn't live here, and he was coming through town, and we needed to get together and talk about some things. And I offered to let him and his girlfriend come over and stay or do whatever they needed to if they were going to get into town late, and we could talk. And he basically said that he would check into it, and he never got back to me. And then I asked if they wanted to do dinner, and he blew me off until 11 o'clock at night and said, oh, let's go do dinner now at 11 o'clock at night. Like, no, I've got stuff to do. That's not an appropriate dinner time.
And that's cereal time. Let's be real.
Right. Like, no more dinner. You're right. Let's go get the cold cereal out of the pantry. And he did that for a couple of days. And then at the end, I'm finally like, well, how about breakfast? How about I come up in the afternoon? Like, I'll rearrange my schedule and I'll come up and see you. And he basically told me that none of those times would work either. And I started getting really angry. And I had to stop and check myself. And what am I getting angry about? Why am I mad? Because I don't want to feel mad. He's not being affected by my being mad. So why am I really mad? And looking at that and seeing where I could make some adjustments in my thought process. And that goes back to being mindful and being aware of what our thoughts are and what we're thinking about. So mindfulness is really important and is a great way to practice that emotional self-care. When you're thinking about mindfulness, a lot of us don't really know what that means. And Charlene and I just talked about a few ways to do that. But one great way to practice and kind of start getting into that space is to notice what you're noticing. When you go for a walk outside, what do you hear? How does the ground feel under your feet? What kind of things are you feeling? Are you touching anything? What are the sensations that are going about? And just being really present in the moment rather than being preoccupied with thoughts, just bringing yourself back to the present. And that's a really great way to start honing in on that mindfulness so that you can do that when other situations come up and you can exert that, I don't want to call it control, but exert that will over whatever it is that you're experiencing so that you can have a shift in your thoughts and in your feelings.
And know that that takes time. When you say all of that, oh Lord, the people that live in my head, maybe I'm whatever. The people that live in my head. And so my mother used to do that when we would go for walks when I was little. And I remember growing up, and it was fine when I was like 6, 7, and we were having these talks. And do you hear the birds? And do you hear the leaves? Now, when you're walking on the leaves, do you feel them crunching underneath your shoes? And I remember being preteenish and being annoyed. So super annoyed because I had things in my head that I was thinking about. I wasn't thinking about the crunching leaves. I wasn't thinking about the birds like you were talking about. I was thinking about, the fact that Kelly didn't want to share her brownie with me at lunch, and Amanda said my coat was stupid, and I wasn't in those moments. And she really kept pushing and pushing and pushing without noticing that she was pushing me to be mindful of where I am. That, Kelly's brownie doesn't matter. Your coat's still keeping you warm while you're walking home from school with me, to just stop and be in that moment. So I am way older than junior high-ish. And it really wasn't until the last probably 10 years of my life to where I started having those practices become like a regular part of my life, to just be in that moment. So if you're starting being mindful today and your brain goes, wait, no, Kelly didn't share her brownie with me. It's okay to just feel the leaves when you felt them, just hear the birds when you hear it, and be centered a little teeny tiny bit at a time. Because you're going to eventually get to a point where you're going to forget all about the brownie.
Right. And like you said, it takes time, which kind of goes into another point of give yourself grace for mistakes. Mm-hmm. Give yourself compassion. We talk about forgiveness in such a way that a lot of times we don't think it applies to forgiving ourselves. And we hold ourselves to such high standards. And sometimes we hold ourselves to standards that we are never going to be able to meet. And then we give up and we throw in the towel and we say, well, I'm not meant to do this because I couldn't do it today. Give yourself some grace, give yourself some compassion, give yourself time to practice. People that are Olympic gold medalists didn't become that way overnight. They trained and they practiced and they trained and they practiced. And you have no idea the struggles and the heartaches and what they put into getting to where they are today. And that's the same kind of work that we have to put into ourselves if we want to shift where we're at. And it's a different kind of work, but we're still going to fall down and have that path, and we still have to work through those things, and we have to learn and we have to grow. Just keep that in mind and give yourself that chance to do that.
So a good way to give yourself some grace is to take some time to meditate on what's going on. And again, we use the word meditate very lightly. We don't mean sit down and have a 6-hour lifelong meditation. You can just take 5 minutes and think about your day and think about what's going on and think about what's really right there and present, and then write it down. Maybe make a journal, have a gratitude jar. Think of something that helps you bring that positive out of that situation to keep your emotional health going in a positive way.
And make it fun. Bringing fun into our lives is really important. And a lot of times we think all this stuff has to be serious, right? I have to take care of myself. And when we think about caring for others and caring for ourselves, it doesn't necessarily include a lot of fun. But make it fun. Have fun with it. Get crafty. One of the things that we can do is an art project. Mm-hmm. But with that art project, it can be so many different things. One fun thing that Charlene said was a gratitude jar.
Yes. So our gratitude jar started a couple years ago with a gigantic jar of pickles from Costco. And I mean like big, and like bigger than my head big. You can't see me, but I'm holding a pickle jar in front of my head. First, I had this idea and we had to find a jar, and I'm not going to go buy a $20 jar for something that my kids might break. So we bought the big jar of pickles, and then we had fun eating the pickles, because every time that we were eating a pickle, we were getting closer to this project. And then we finished the pickles and cleaned the jar out, painted this gigantic jar with a tree on it, because for me, trees just always bring happiness, and we wrote our year in a jar on it. So whenever somebody's got something good going on, like you aced a test or you won a sporting event game, you would write it down and you put it in the gratitude jar. And then at the end of the year, we opened it all up and looked at all these amazing things that happened to us.
I love that. We created something called a fun jar out of a pickle jar. I couldn't get the smell of pickles out of it, so it still today smells like pickles. But that too, bringing fun into it. So we wrote down all of these activities. When we talk about something, we're like, oh, we want to do that. We would write them down on slips of paper and put them in the fun jar. And then when we were looking for something to do, or we ran out of ideas, or we came to a boring weekend, we would pull out the ideas and be like, let's do this.
Great idea. now I need to do that, a fun jar.
Yeah, that's what we called it, a fun jar. And it doesn't have to be a jar. I enjoy making cards. I have a friend that enjoys painting. You know, it can be, even if you're not arts and craftsy, maybe something off of Pinterest.
And if you're really type A, it's okay to make a spreadsheet. Whatever brings you joy.
Right, get creative and figure out how to put that all together. But having fun is important. And a lot of times we don't make time for fun. And we don't make time for fun because we're so busy saying yes to everybody else that we're saying no to ourselves constantly. Final tip for the day is to say yes to yourself and say no to other people. It is okay to say no to requests that don't align with who you are, with where you're going, with what you want. It's okay to put yourself first. Take that as permission to do that, because sometimes I think we get into a space where we forget that we have that voice and that we have the ability to set boundaries and to say no and to say yes to ourselves. All of those things kind of go hand in hand.
I think, and not to go off completely on another one, I know we're going to talk about parenting a lot at another time, but I think that all goes back to how we were raised. We were constantly, as children, raised to have permission to go to your friend's house, have permission to get paints out and do a paint project, have permission to, eat a bowl of cereal at 11 o'clock at night, because it wasn't always something that would work for your family. You had your own set of rules. And I think that continues on into our adulthood of like, wait, I can paint at 11:30 while I eat my bowl of cereal? and I'm not saying do that every day. Like, don't just go out on a whim every single moment of every day, although I think that might be a really wonderful life to have, but we all have responsibilities. Just give yourself, again, grace. Like, give yourself a chance to enjoy and make that mental space.
And experiment and find what you like. So many of us don't even know what we enjoy or what is fun for us because we don't give ourselves permission to go out and try anything new, because our lives have to revolve around whatever our responsibilities are, and we take the fun out of it. Go learn sign language, go learn Spanish, go learn French, go take a boxing class, go take an art class, go learn how to crochet, go learn how to do whatever it is, go learn how to jump out of an airplane, go learn how to bungee jump, go learn how to fly a hot air balloon. Whatever it is that you want to do, there are so many options out there. Just make a list, and then pick one and go explore it and try it.
Right. And if you're having a hard time making a list, look at what you're looking at on social media. What are you liking? What are you double clicking on Instagram? What are you sharing? Like, you might really be into, what is that thing where you're on like a water ski, but it's like a boat, a jet ski. That's what it is. I'm sorry. Maybe like and it's been like filling up your feed and you're like, oh, I just really want to do that, but I'm not near the ocean or I'm not near this. Well, go do it on a lake. Go find a way to do the things that are taking up your mental energy and your space in your head because you are just loving them there. Write it down.
And with that, I think we'll end there with a lot of good tips. Just a real quick recap on what we talked about. You want to practice being present, being mindful, reflecting on the good parts of your day, reflecting on what you accomplished, reflecting on where you had successes throughout the day. Give yourself some grace for where you may have fallen down, but also recognize where maybe you can improve and notice what you're noticing going forward. Don't forget to have fun. Number one point is have fun. Also, some light meditation, again, kind of that reflection, and then say yes to yourself and know that it is okay to say no and to have boundaries and to put those boundaries in place so that you have the time and space to say yes for yourself.
And don't forget to say yes when you hit subscribe to our podcast, and tune in next week when we hit week 4 of self-care.